Okay, so Kristin, starting from the top, let's start over again. Can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your positions?
So, like I said, I wasn't born in Texas, but I jokingly tell folks that I got here as quickly as I could. I was probably about 7 or 8 when my parents moved here. I did move away for a bit when I very first got married, but after having kids, I told my husband that I knew where I wanted to raise them. I wanted to give my children the same experiences and opportunities that I had growing up here in Texas. So my background is actually in education. I've spent about the last 20 years working in either early childhood education or in kindergarten, kind of switched back and forth between those as it best fit our family. And then also worked in children's ministry. So my whole life has been dedicated to advocating for children and creating really a better world for them. That's really where my heart is, and that's what my lifelong passion has been. So my district is actually just north of Ginny's. I'm in Texas House District 15, and that is north of the Montgomery County, Harris County line for folks that are familiar with the area. It encompasses the Woodlands and then parts of Spring, and there's like a sliver of Conroe on the north side. And then the eastern side of the district is east of 45 and goes all the way down through Bender's Landing and Tamina and that area. Some of the issues that are really important to folks in my district are the same things that are really important to folks all across Texas. As I've been block walking, people are very concerned about the heartbeat bill and the overturning of Roe and how access to care is impacting women's lives across the state. The other issue that parents are very concerned about here in this district is schools. They're concerned about school safety with the situation that happened in Uvalde and how we keep our kids safe. But they're also concerned about how we keep teachers in the classroom and what's happening with the teacher shortage. So those are concerns about this from this district. And then, of course, my 3 pillars of my campaign are education, infrastructure, and then protecting the constitutional rights of all Texans.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Kristin. Next is Ginny Brown Daniel, and she is in House District 150. Ginny believes that Texas has passed some of the most harmful legislation in the past year, and she couldn't sit by and do nothing while neighbors are being harmed. Her district includes Spring and the suburbs of Northwest Houston. Welcome, Ginny. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe some key positions in your platform.
Sure. First, I just want to say, Nancy, thank you so much for everything that you have been doing for the past year and Mothers Against Greg Abbott. It is great to see your presence and our presence in the state of Texas. So thank you. My name is Ginny, and I'm an ordained minister. I served for 12 years as pastor of a church in Spring, and after that served kind of like a bishop, overseeing churches in my denomination for 5.5 years, and completed that ministry last year and took some time to kind of breathe and rest. And then the awful legislation of last year in Texas started to happen. Voter suppression, abortion ban, permitless carry, and then the trans youth bill. And every time I, like many folks, would go outside and shake our fists and spit on the ground and say, somebody should do something about that. And every time I kept hearing this voice in my head and spirit that said, you need to run for state representative. And it felt kind of like Moses in kind of saying, oh no, not me. I've never been to a political party office or meeting or anything like that. But the more that this legislation kept coming out, I realized that District 150 and all of Texas is not being represented by people like my opponent, Valerie Swanson. She is very extreme, and she's not representing District 150. So District 150 includes parts of Spring, the southern part of the Woodlands, and parts of Tomball. And the demographics are actually, it reflects the growing demographics in Texas, which is, it is majority persons of color. It's 29% Hispanic, It's 17% African American and 9% Asian American. So what we've been doing in my campaign is block walking twice a week, going to those precincts where there is a high likelihood of Democratic voters who have not been turning out, and knocking on doors and letting folks know that they have a candidate who wants to represent them. And so one of the things that's very important to me is public education, because as a representative, Kristin and I will be responsible for the budget and the amount of money goes to our school districts. So I've been going to, there's 4 school districts in District 150. So I've been going to all of the school board monthly meetings and their work session, which is the night before. That's where all of the presentations and things like that happen. Mm-hmm. I've been meeting with superintendents. I've been meeting with the police chiefs of each of the school districts and retired principals and educators, as well as the school board members. And it's important to me to do that, because if we're going to represent the school boards and the school districts, we have to understand what's going on. And so I just want to say that the educators are doing phenomenal jobs in putting our children first and making sure that their needs are taken care of, especially in the past 2 years of this pandemic. I'm also a very proud gun sense candidate for Moms Demand Action. Mm-hmm. And what's important to me, especially after Uvalde, is making sure that we work across the aisle and closing some of the loopholes that would have prevented what has happened in the past few years, especially at Robb Elementary School. And so that's very important to me, as well as looking at what can we do for women and families throughout District 150 related to abortion rights, now that the abortion ban bill tomorrow will be going into effect. What is it that we need to do in order to provide for our residents other safe options related to abortion rights in this time? So that's, in a nutshell, where I am right now.
That's really great. Well, thank you so much. You brought up something that I thought was really interesting, that both you and Kristin have some opponents that are a little nutty. Okay, I'm just gonna put that out there. They're a little nutty.
That's very polite. Yes,
to say the least. So let's talk about these little nutty people in your all's district. So Kristin, Jenny did sort of talk a little bit about the person who's nutty that she's running against. Can you tell us a little bit about your own nutty over there that you're running against? Tell us about them.
Our representative right now is sort of famous for his antics. And that's probably the nicest way that I can say that. So District 15, actually, the representative that we have right now, our incumbent, is Steve Toth. And if you are not familiar with Steve Toth is the author of the CRT bill, which is the bill that's causing so much havoc for our teachers right now, to the point where I actually just had a conversation with a teacher the other day who is a good friend of mine that I've known for over 20 years. And she teaches high school English. And she said, because of that bill, she has pulled every single book out of her classroom library because it is not worth the risk. She's so close to retirement. She said it is not worth the risk of having those books in her room. So we can thank Steve Toth for that. Steve is also a big supporter of loosening gun laws and regulations. He's co-authored and supported a lot of the legislation that came through in this last session, again, regarding constitutional carry and lifting a lot of the requirements for concealed handgun carry, which is deplorable in my opinion. The other thing that we can credit Steve with is he co-authored the heartbeat bill. So he's not my favorite guy in the in the Texas legislature, to say the least. And his latest claim to fame was being highlighted during the Deep in the Pink from Texas Right to Life and the Wilkes brothers and the Dunn brothers. And his goal is to defund public education And he's very open about that. And he's open about defunding the arts and lots of other important things that are important to us as Texas.
Okay. So while we're talking about this, Jenny, did you have anything else to add about the crazy person you're running against? Did you want to say anything else about them?
So I would. So Valerie Swanson is a member of the Texas Freedom Caucus. That's an 11-member caucus who has been doing a lot of harm and hateful things in the state of Texas. She is the only woman, and she was also the co-author of the abortion ban bill. And what I want to lift up is that even after that bill was passed last year, in the state of Texas, there were businesses that wanted to provide for their employees other options for abortion services that they may have to go out of state. And when this Texas Freedom Caucus found out about that, they wrote a letter to those businesses to say, be careful, because things are coming and you're in danger of liability from that perspective, which doesn't sound very pro-business in terms of letting businesses decide for themselves how they should function and operate for their business and their employees. And so she is one of those she's the only woman in the Texas Freedom Caucus. The other piece that I would share with you is that she proudly states that the co-author of what I would describe as the trans youth hate bill. If you remember last year, there was a lot of focus on an earlier bill related to trans youth and bathrooms. And I've talked to families who went to Austin and testified, and the emotional drain that caused for them and for their children. And we got through that time, and then Valerie was able to slide this bill in, which focuses on athletics. And she has already stated in public at a candidate forum where I attended that if she is reelected, the first bill that she will sponsor is the same exact bill that she authored this time, but with college athletics. And so I share that to say that she is dangerous and she's doing things that are harmful, hateful, and as an ordained minister, I don't say this very often, but immoral. What she is doing is not loving our neighbors, especially our trans youth and their families. She is harming them and hurting them, and that's not okay.
Okay, thank you so much. And you're right. That was a horrible bill, and I still remember when, oh my gosh, the LGBTQ families that reached out to me to talk to me after they did actually go speak down at the Capitol, and just how heartbreaking it all was. And they're just big bullies. We have to absolutely vote them out of office. They are just big bullies. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so let's move to a related issue, and one that's really heated, especially in the areas of Texas where you all live. Okay. Right now, we are going to be, Mothers Against Greg Abbott is going to be playing in just a handful of races for school board races. But it happens to be that a couple of the ones that we're hopefully going to be helping out are going to be in your areas, in which you actually would be, you're running in and would be representing. So that would be Conroe and Spring. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on in education there in the Houston area, because of the book bans, because of the anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric that we're hearing from the extremists. Let's talk about, what you're hearing about education. We could talk about it for quite a while, probably. So let's talk about what you're hearing from your constituents, and then also about what you're hearing from the teachers and some solutions that you hope to propose as part of your platform this coming year if you are elected into office. So we will start with Jenny.
So as I mentioned, there are 4 school districts: Aldine, Line, Spring, and Tomball, and they are all very strong, very wonderful. And when I started going to the board meetings, I naively thought that after the past 2 years, there were going to be the red carpet was going to be rolled out and lots of celebration and thank yous to the teachers, to the superintendents, to the school board members, that the parents would be saying thank you for making sure that our children have been taken care of. And instead, what I found was that in some of our school district board meetings, that there were extremist parents who really are the minority who got the microphone in the public comment time and lambasted the teachers, the superintendent, the central office, the school board members, everybody in not just, to say I disagree with something, but the vile things that they were saying was so ugly and not worthy of our community from that perspective. And so then I began to talk to teachers and retired teachers. And what I found was that these extremist parents are very well funded and that it's not a local thing. It really is, in some cases, a Texas-wide issue and a national issue in terms of PACs with a lot of money, including the one that Kristin mentioned a few minutes ago of the group of West Texas oil billionaires who have stated that their goal is to weaken public education and take that funding in order to fund private Christian schools, which as a minister, I'm fine with private Christian schools, but not to the detriment and to the funding of our public schools. And so that is what right now is the undercurrent in all 4 of the districts in the community. And it's coming with the school board elections from that perspective. So there's a lot of anxiousness and there's a lot of wonderful anger and ready to, just like Mothers Against Greg Abbott, there are groups, fierce warriors throughout our community who are saying, not in my area. Our public schools are too strong and too important. And that's what gives me hope in these days and in this time. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I should add, Jenny, that we are also supporting Klein. So we will be Klein and Spring and Conroe. So we actually are going to be playing in a few of your all school districts. So Aldine, I don't know what Aldine is like. I haven't looked into it. I don't know if they have any school board action going on or not. I'll have to look that up to see if they're on our list, but for sure, Klein and Spring for you, for sure. So, okay, next up is Kristin. Kristin, can you give us a little bit of information about education where in your house district, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So similar to what Jenny is seeing in her district, we're seeing a lot of that here in my district. The big district here in 15 is Conroe Independent School District. So it's one of the biggest districts in the state. Now we do have 3 school board seats that are up for election this year. We've got 2 incumbents that are running to be reseated, and then a 3rd position that has multiple people running for that. Just like Jenny said, some of the people that are running for those particular positions are being funded by national organizations. My opponent actually is funding a couple of them, and they are, I don't want to give their group any extra credit, but they're organized, and their whole mission is to try to remove anything in public schools that is affirming for the LGBTQ community, or anything that is supportive of diversity or social emotional learning. So for those of you who have an education background like me, you know what that is. I know a lot of folks do not know what social emotional learning is. So just a quick little crash course on that. Social emotional learning for teachers means looking at children and meeting them where they're at and meeting their needs before we worry so much about their academic scoring. So if a child comes in and they haven't had breakfast, the training in social emotional learning says, it's really not fair to teach a child Algebra 2 when they haven't eaten since lunchtime yesterday. So maybe we need to make sure we're meeting their other needs first. Social emotional learning has nothing to do with CRT. And CRT is not taught in any of our public schools in the state of Texas, but my opponent and a lot of the folks that are opposing the actions of the school board would have us believe otherwise. So we do have some good organized groups, just like Ginny said, just like Mothers Against Greg Abbott. There's a couple of mothers groups here that are advocating for the school board and advocating for our teachers, but they are under assault and they do get lots of comments that are very repetitive. I'm sure Ginny's seeing the same thing in her districts where, it's the same 5 or 10 people that come up and they say the exact same thing, like they're all reading off of the same script. So that's a little bit of what we're combating here in CISD.
Yeah, well, thank you all for sharing that. So we talked a little bit about these communities just a second ago. So one of the things that's really important at Mothers Against Greg Abbott is to ensure that every Texan is treated equally and fairly. And that includes our LGBTQ plus community and our, people of color community and other minority groups that are lacking fair representation here in Texas. So we wanted to see, how do you feel like you can help implement fairness if you are elected into office? So we will start with Ginny.
So fairness to me is critical. In terms of, it starts with voting rights. In the state of Texas, we have had, especially persons of color, have had our voting rights destroyed in many ways in terms of the ways that individuals have to get, everything just perfect in order to register to vote. And then if they're doing mail-in ballot or their polling locations. And Nancy, the challenge for me for that is that in 2020, Harris County actually increased voter turnout by 35%. Because we had more accessibility. So we had 24-hour drive-through voting where people could drive through because of the pandemic. It was much more open from that perspective, giving people who work 2 or 3 jobs or have to care for their families, especially persons of color, making sure that they have those opportunities. And so from that perspective, I will fight to reinstate the voting rights that should be there in terms of accessibility and ensuring from that perspective that all Texans have that ability. To that end, I've been having conversations and meeting with African-American leaders because I am a white woman and I do not know what it is to be an African-American in the state of Texas in this time. I do not know what it is to be Hispanic. And so a part of what is very important to me is to build those relationships, to listen and to develop messages and plans that really meet the needs of those who are Hispanic and those who are African-American and Asian-American in this community, so that fairness is about making sure that their voices and needs are amplified from that perspective. So that's a part of what I will be doing, looking at living wage issues, looking at public education from that perspective as well.
Great, thank you so much. All right, Kristin.
Well, yeah, that's hard to piggyback off of Ginny. She pretty much hit all the points, right?
Yeah.
So I wholeheartedly agree with what she said about access to the polls. Voters in this state, unfortunately, have a really difficult time registering to vote, staying on the rolls, and proving that they're eligible voters. the policies that we have in place really disenfranchise voters. Usually voters who have, Hispanic or Latinx or Latinx sounding last names, a lot of times those are more likely to get purged from the rolls. And then also, we do not make access to the polls something that is equitable for people of all different abilities. Ginny touched on it a little bit with the drive-through voting, but the Secretary of State and the representatives that we have in those positions, Dan Patrick and Ken Paxton, and then everybody who's in the Texas Ledge, has made it incredibly difficult for people who are not physically able to make it to the polls, even in a vehicle. Made it very difficult for them to gain access to mail-in ballots, which is absolutely outrageous. And they've sown these seeds of, doubt in our electoral process. Well, like I said before, I grew up here. I remember voting with my mom, and my aunts all live here. And I remember when they used to register at the polls. They used to take a utility bill with them and an ID to show that the names match, and they were able to register that same day. So Texas has not always been this, bizarre totalitarian, authority over, who can vote and who can't. And really what it is, it's about suppressing the vote. So that's going to be, first on the docket. The other thing that is very important to me is equity in education. So a lot of what we're seeing with this, CRT bill specifically, is we're not teaching the full history of, the folks of the United States, the history of the United States. The final draft that was pushed through took out the writings and the readings from Dr. Martin Luther King and several other pivotal figures in American history. So one of the first things that we have to do is make sure that everybody's represented in the classroom and make sure that everybody feels seen and heard. And right now, that's not happening. So the other thing that's going to be first on the list, they're going to be joined, is repealing that legislation and making sure that everybody has equitable access to representation, education, and voting.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for that. And for anybody that's listening, I think starting next week, they're going to have hearings for the State Board of Education for a lot of those very important leaders in the Latino community, as well as in the Black community, that got taken out of our textbooks. I'm talking about Martin Luther King, Cesar Chavez, Dolores Huerta. Those things got taken out, and there's going to be hearings next week that we could talk about them. So that's just FYI for anybody listening, because we all need to remember to show up in Austin when those hearings start. So thank you. Thank you for mentioning that. It's so important. Everybody needs to know what is happening right now within our textbooks and how it actually is going to lead to further inequities in our society. So that's so important. Thank you so much. So Jenny, I have this question for you. So on your website, you mentioned that you have been a pastor of a church in Spring, Texas for 12 years. How does faith in your church practice, how do you believe that this experience as a pastor of faith prepared you for serving the residents in your district?
So my whole spiritual background falls on the golden rule of love your neighbor. And for me, in the Hebrew scriptures and in the Christian scriptures, there are story after story after story of examples of what it means to love your neighbor, especially when your neighbor is vulnerable, when your neighbor is the foreigner, when your neighbor is ostracized. And so in the pulpit as a pastor, I preached many sermons from that perspective, and I led our faith community in the community to advocate in that way. And also serving on boards such as an assistance ministries to make sure that we in the community were taking care of serving our neighbor, especially our vulnerable neighbor, from that perspective. But what I realized was that as a faith leader, in this critical moment, this is about fighting for our democracy. and that it was time for me to take off my clergy robe and lace up my tennis shoes and run for office, because there are things in terms of loving our neighbor and serving our neighbor that need to be done from a legislative perspective. I say all of that also with respect to those who are of different faiths, different religions. A part of what is very important to me is to understand that we come and believe in a lot of different ways. And so I have strong relationships with those of different faiths in this area. And also the understanding that there are those who choose not to and have no faith. And that is fine and wonderful as well, because we express who we are as community in a lot of different ways. I also know, because when I was pastor, some of those who were members were in the LGBTQIA plus community who had been harmed and abused by the church and the faith community. And so I am very aware that for some, my being a minister is a detriment. And so I want to make sure that we create space where everyone's voices and beliefs are respected from that perspective, because what really matters is how we serve one another and how we take care of one another as a community in whatever way we express it. For me, that is through a Christian perspective, but I value and respect people of all and no faiths.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Kristin, you are also a minister. So can you tell us a little bit about your parish and how you believe your ministry and what you believe in helps support Texans in your district?
Absolutely. Like Jenny, I've stepped away from working in the church because I am running. So there is there's a separation there for church and state, but also for 501Cs to be able to maintain their nonprofit status. You cannot be politically involved. I personally do support that idea because in my belief, it was one of the things that Jesus actually discussed. He says, give God what is God and give Caesar what is Caesar's. And Jesus was offered the opportunity to, be Caesar, and he declined. So I'm not, you'll notice that even though my background, I have a faith background, I don't post a lot of Bible verses. I don't do any of that. And that's really out of respect for folks that have different beliefs than myself, because, even though I'm a Christian and I've worked in children's ministry, our district is very diverse. And when you elect someone to be your representative, they're not representing just a certain religion or just a certain theology. They're really representing the whole population. And I think that our representatives need to be more cognizant of that, because right now they really are not. One of my own personal favorite, not that I do a lot of Bible verses, but just one that is my favorite. Jesus told the disciples, what you do for the least of these, you do for me. And so that's the one that I've always really carried with me everywhere I've gone and with everything that I've done. And, in the scripture, he's talking about helping the brokenhearted, helping the widow, helping someone who's crippled or who's, poor. And I kind of flip the verbiage on it a little bit for myself, because I also think it's important for us to remember what we do to the least of these, we do to him. And so when we take groups that are marginalized, disenfranchised, and hurting, and then we pass policies that further scrutinize them, that is in direct conflict with being Christ-like. That's my personal belief. And so, that is how I plan on approaching representation, because I don't have to agree with someone's theology or, their whatever, to be able to be a good representative. It is not my job to condemn or condone any behavior for someone's lifestyle. I'm an ally for the LGBTQIA community. And, it really upsets me quite a bit to see a lot of the rhetoric that is going on with our current representation, not just Toth, but also Ginny's opponent, Valerie. They just don't really have a lot of kind words to say. And so to me, that's not a good representation of faith. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to represent the people.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. I love the fact that that both of you all are, like, I always call it, I am a person of faith, but I always call it my quiet Christianity, because I'm a strong believer in a separation of church and state. But I think that what I love to do is random acts of kindness and just lifting up my neighbors and taking care of one another. So love your neighbor is the thing I wake up to every day. It's the thing that keeps me going absolutely every day. So thank you all so much for your input on that. It really, that was great. It really meant a lot to me listening to both of you, and I'm sure to everybody else who's also listening. So along with that,
Nancy, can I say one other thing? A part of what I've been saying in different places is, I'm ready to fight for our democracy and fight for District 150. And at first I thought, well, maybe this sounds like an oxymoron, that a minister is ready to fight. And so after some reflection, I realized, my faith informs me that those in the sacred script and those that I hold up, like Fannie Lou Hamer and Reverend Warnock, are ones who fought with all of who they were for their neighbor and for the vulnerable. And so that kind of summoned within me of, I'm continuing that kind of spiritual journey with those, in terms of that's what we do, is we fight for those for whom injustice has been enacted on them. So
yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. No, I think 100%. Like somebody, said something to me from like the far right recently, and I just turned around and said, I'm fighting for you too. I'm fighting for Republicans just as hard as I'm fighting for Democrats and independents, because at this point it's about democracy, and it is about loving thy neighbor and creating really good, healthy communities, because we have no excuse as Texans not to have one. It's just ridiculous that we could be such a prosperous state, but then we're at the bottom of everything else. That has got to end. So that's why we need to elect good people with a good moral backbone that are going to make positive change for all Texans. Because I don't know, from my experience, you have to lift up those that are most in need. You just have to, and that's our job, right? So that's what we have to do. So thank you all so much for that. Along with that, that's something that one of those things where we're seeing on the far right, the really religious people come out and combat women and women reproductive rights. And they're coming after all types of things with women. I mean, they're going to just start stripping away at the 14th Amendment. So I would like to hear from both of you what your positions are on reproductive rights and human rights. And how do you feel about the overturning of Roe versus Wade? And what do you think can be done in Texas right now? I mean, a lot is on the table. We didn't have some great news today, but let's talk about it and just see, how do we feel as women? We're just women to women. Let's talk. What do we think is going on? Let's start with Kristin.
So this is actually one of the catalyst issues that really pushed me into this race with education. I have 3 children. I have 2 sons, and I have a 12-year-old daughter who is about to enter into, those scientifically reproductive years. So we'll just say scientifically reproductive. I am a firm supporter of women's right to choose. Like so many women in this group, I've been through high-risk pregnancy, and I had to make a decision that was right for my family and my husband and my son. Thankfully, at that time, I was not living in Texas. I was living in Washington State, and I didn't have to adhere to a government mandated timetable. And I had an amazing physician that told me that, while I was choosing to continue the pregnancy, her number one priority was my health and my livelihood. So thankfully it all worked out, and I had a beautiful daughter. But that is not a decision that I would ever wish on anyone. And that is not a decision that I think that anyone needs to be making for someone else. That is a decision that needs to be made between a woman and her physician, and if she so chooses, her partner. pregnancy, for all of us who have had children, we all know it is something that absolutely turns your world upside down. It puts you at high risk for preeclampsia, HELP, all kinds of conditions that would never have been something that would have been an issue for you if you were not pregnant. So just the very fact of becoming pregnant puts your life at risk. Now, the totalitarian approach that Dan Patrick and Abbott and, the clown car has taken is that they think that they have the right to dictate what happens to my body, to Jenny's body, to my daughter's body, and they want to make no exceptions. And to me, that is absolutely unacceptable. They have no right to be in that doctor's office, just like that great ad that you put together, Nancy, where they called Greg Abbott to make that decision. That's not the government's decision. I don't think the government has any business in anyone's medical file. So I think that they're practicing medicine without a license, and they need to get the heck out of the physician's office.
Okay, thank you so much. My family just came in the door, so they're very loud.
Wonderful.
I am. Sometimes I'm in the like in the office, and today I'm in the home because I'm exhausted and I just didn't want to drive anywhere. So that is just me being completely honest with that right now. So let's talk about.
It's just real life. We're all that way.
Oh my gosh, it's totally complete chaos over here all the time. It's been so crazy, especially since, some of those ads have gone viral, and it's just been really busy over here, just all the time. There's always busy work and people around, and it's been fabulous. So I love it because we're changing Texas. So it's so great to be part of that.
That's right.
Let's go right ahead and let's talk about Uvalde. It's
can I get a chance to answer?
Oh, yes. Did I skip
question?
you? I'm so sorry. Oh, yes.
It's okay. It's all right.
Go ahead. I'm telling you, I'm exhausted today. I apologize. Jenny, please, your turn.
It's all good. I just wanted to say, number one, it is a gift to be a woman. I love being a woman, and there is energy, there is strength in being a woman in the female body, in the spirit of, oh, you told me I can't do that. Hold my pearls and watch me. And what I see over and over with women, Hispanic women and African-American women and LGBTQ individuals is that there is a gift in being a woman. And what I want to say, in terms of abortion rights, when I was pastor in Spring, there's a Planned Parenthood branch down the road from my church. And there were some extremists, religious extremists, who were boycotting. Even though abortion services were not being provided there, they were still boycotting and doing all the signs and all the fear tactic. And my naive, righteous anger said, oh, no, that's not happening. And so I went and volunteered at the Planned Parenthood main office in downtown Houston. And I volunteered as to watch the parking lot. And I have to tell you that it gave me the opportunity to watch, number one, the vilest people in the name of some false god that really is their own fear, spewing stuff that should not be spewed. And the most courageous women who were coming into that parking lot and having to go through that. And then the people who were the doctors and the healthcare workers and the ones who were holding their hand, that they are the emblems of courage to me that I took with me to say, this is what it means to choose in a very, very vulnerable moment in life of what is best for our body. And so from my perspective, when the Supreme Court ruling came down on Roe v. Wade, I was gutted. I I cried. I was angry. I knew it was coming. But in my lifetime, we have always had abortion rights to protect us and for us to be able to choose whether we want to have children or not. And to all of a sudden not have it, it made me angry. And to understand that Kristin's and my opponents are the very ones who not just are supporting what happened with Roe v. Wade going down, but took it one step further in this kind of ban that not only says it's okay or you can't have an abortion, they are going after criminal charges on anyone who fathoms to help women in that situation. And quite honestly, it pisses me off, and it should piss every person off. It should piss off every Republican pro-business person, because you're about to see women who have been in the work field who now have to decide, okay, I've got to have this child. So do I stay in the work field, or am I going to have to step out of it? And that is not okay. And our economy is going to go down, and we are going to see healthcare costs rising, which is going to be on all of us. And that is not okay. I have to tell you that I was block walking a couple of months ago in one of the neighborhoods, and a woman was walking her dog. And so I, like all candidates, walk across the street and start introducing myself. And she said, "Oh, no. I know who you are, Ginny. You've got my vote." She said, "I have been a lifelong Republican. I have never voted for a Democrat, but I'm voting for you because what they have done to abortion rights is wrong." And I share that to say, this is across the board. 75% of Texans believe that there should be some expression of abortion rights, and we have to fight. And so a part of what I will be advocating is the repeal of this harsh and harmful abortion ban, but also in terms of what's the Medicaid amount that we are leaving on the table from the federal government, because we are saying, oh no, we'll take care of our own, but we don't take care of our own. So let's put that money into the communities that are now going to be strongly affected because of this abortion ban. If we're going to do this, then we've got to support our infrastructure, from our healthcare, from education, from our social services, in order in this critical moment, until we can have abortion rights again, to make sure that we have all that we need in place to take care of every woman and every person who is in a dangerous situation. Thank you.
Amen. Amen. As I always say too, if they're going to be pro-life, then let's take it all the way. I want to see them improve all of our services. If they're not willing to do that, then they're not pro-life. So this is ridiculous. We've had enough. So we got to fight back. So thank you. So now let's move to Uvalde. I promise. We have a few minutes left, but let's go right ahead and talk about this issue that really has impacted so many Texans. And Governor Abbott has had 3 months to address this issue, and it still hasn't been addressed. And this weekend, on the 27th, there is a March for Our Lives rally in Austin with the Uvalde families and the families from Santa Fe that are coming together, and they're marching and they're doing a little rally over here in Austin, Texas. So we have to have action on this now. So what are you hearing about the massacre in Uvalde and gun rights and gun safety reforms that we do need to pass? What are your constituents? How are they feeling about everything? Let's start with Kristin.
So parents are pissed. There's not really any nice way to say that. Parents are pissed. They're pissed that the governor promised that he was going to deliver all this money to make schools safe, and schools started and nothing has been implemented. The funds have not been dispersed. And we are sitting with the exact same situation that we had essentially 12 months ago when school started. Yeah. So I can tell you a little bit about my own experience with this as an educator and working here in Texas in this district. I have been in active lockdowns twice. Once was when my son was about a 1-year-old and he was in the same building that I was in, and I had stepped down to teach early childhood education. I was with 3-year-olds, and I had to hide a classroom full of 3-year-olds and keep them quiet because there was a gentleman on our campus grounds with a firearm. Thankfully, he never entered the building, but unfortunately, he took his own life in our parking lot. So that was tragic, but it should never have happened. In the same way that Uvalde never should have happened. And 2 years ago, our schools were actually safer than they are now, because what the Texas legislature did and what Greg Abbott did in pandering to the gun lobby and making it firearms more accessible really to anyone who wants them by doing away with the requirements to get a concealed handgun license, and then making it so, really anyone can just go into any store and buy a firearm. There were some 70,000 concealed handgun license applications that were rejected before this law went into place. And now those folks have access to firearms, and they should not. And I do have some other unfortunate experience with firearms, but, I'll just get down to brass tacks. Really, I, like Ginny, am a gun sense candidate from Moms Demand Action. And what we really need to do is just enact some common sense gun legislation. We need to repeal all this stuff that happened with constitutional carry. We need to close up loopholes that allow people to buy guns from private sellers. We need to raise the minimum age from 18 to 21. I have a 19-year-old son. He's bright and very level-headed. I do not think that he needs a firearm. If he doesn't need to drink, and if he can't book a rental car and he can't book a hotel room, then he should not be able to go into a store and buy a long gun, which an AR is considered a long gun, and do a buy now, pay later program. And I've done extensive research on this after Uvalde. I called the top trauma specialists in the country and asked them, what is this doing to our kids? What's happening when they're growing up in a society where we're training them to normalize this behavior, where these kinds of things happen down the road, or they go through an active shooter lockdown situation where, like in my case, never entered into our campus doors, but then we go into the following day, Wednesday, and just act like it's a normal day. We never address the stress and the trauma. We're conditioning them to live in hypervigilance. And that has some really, really bad long-term health implications. I also reached out to top law enforcement across the country and talked to some folks that quite literally wrote the book on how to respond to school shootings. And overwhelmingly, they said we have to get control over the firearms. We have to make sure that people who do not need to have them do not have access to them. So this is a top priority for me.
Thank you. Thank you. Jenny?
So in the past few weeks, as schools have been preparing to get started back here, what I observed in the meetings that I've been going to, both the school board meetings and schools, but also Chamber of Commerce meetings and a public safety forum that meets every month, there is this anxiousness that is not spoken directly, but it's spoken in the questions or the comments in terms of safety. I was talking to an Aldine ISD teacher who said that when she went back to school a few weeks ago, that she has said to her family, here's my plan, here's my will, here's what will happen if I am in this situation. And she wants to have that conversation, and it freaks her family out. And what I share that because that's happening in a lot of places. Or if it's not a conversation that's being had in public places, it's in people's thoughts and worries about what will happen to my child, what will happen to me, what will happen to my family. Immediately after Uvalde, one of the police chiefs of one of the school districts contacted me and said, we need to work together. This person said, I disagreed with the permitless carry bill last year, and I shared that with Governor Abbott, and I'm concerned about what is happening right now. And this person said, there are solutions that we can do, but we have to work across the aisle with one another. In my work with Moms Demand Action, what I know is that there are very obvious solutions in terms of the background check, in terms of raising the minimum age, as Kristin said, to 21. But even in that, there are other issues that we have to look at in terms of gun sense legislation. The final thing that I will say is in the past few days, I've wondered, my opponent, Valerie, what has her stance been? She is a proud member of the NRA and attended the NRA convention just days after the massacre. But she has said nothing, no demand for accountability, no plans for what we will do next. And that, for me, is what we have to do in this situation of there are things that happen that should not have happened, and we can't blame them on the teachers. We have lots of video to show what went wrong in that moment. And so a part of what I will do is demand that accountability in making sure that what happened in Uvalde does not happen in our local schools and in our communities.
Great, thank you so much. So, Kristin, we're gonna wrap up our webinar for tonight, and I want you to tell us, like, where can we find you? Where do you need some support and some help on your campaign right now? And I also wanted to let both of you all know that we are endorsing both of you all. We're in the middle of developing all kinds of graphics and stuff for you guys and some things. And so we'll be sending those as soon as they're done. But you all will be endorsed by Mothers Against Greg Abbott. And hopefully, if we are able to get a digital billboard in your area, we will put up one of your graphics on our digital billboard. So we're just waiting to see where we're going to have digital billboards and where we're not. So you all will be included in that in your area. So that'll be helpful. And that includes, I see Coach Cam is on here too. That includes Coach Cam. Did he leave? He might have just logged off a minute ago. But anyway, so Kristin, let's go right ahead and let's talk to you and just can you tell us where we can find you, how we can support you, and what your needs are right now?
So I'm going to go out on a limb here, Jenny. I hope you don't mind. And I'm going to say that I think we probably need a lot of the same support. So my sort of like Jenny and I had discussed before, one of the first things, the elephant in the room, so to speak, is fundraising. So both of our opponents are heavily backed by Texas Right to Life. They're both members of the Freedom Caucus. They're both funded by the Dunn brothers and the Wilkes. So they've got quite the bankroll. And as much as I can stretch a dollar with being a teacher, and as much as I'm sure Ginny can stretch a dollar with being in ministry, neither one of those jobs is known for being incredibly lucrative. You know, it does cost money to print push cards and you know, send text and do all of those things. So that's going to be first, I think, and foremost is fundraising. And you can find my webpage at Johnson, JOHNSON, 4 spelled out FOR, Texas, TEXAS, house, HOUSE.com. That's the joy of having a very common last name. So I have a nice long web address. The other thing is volunteers. So I discussed block walking and those push cards, but they're really useless if you don't have people to help you get them on doors. So that's a really big thing. Just, you know, again, you can go to my website and there is a little link there to sign up for the newsletter or to volunteer, and we will send you a weekly newsletter so you can keep up with where we are and what we're doing, and you can join us. I am, I think, on all of the social platforms. My 19-year-old helps me keep up with that. So I do have TikTok. I'm also on Twitter, as well as Facebook and Instagram. So you can find me. All of those links are on my Facebook page and on my website.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Jenny, how about you? How can we help you out?
So like Kristin, money is important. As I've been doing call time and calling folks that don't live in the district to ask for money, they will say, but I don't live in your district, I can't vote for you. And I say, but you can give, because what happens in District 150 is happening in Texas in terms of the hateful legislation led by both of our opponents from that perspective. I have a Zoom or a QR code on the left side here, and my website is TexansForGinny.com, GINNY. And so that will have a donate button as well. In terms of what we need, because our demographic is 29% Hispanic, one of the things that we have found is that we need Spanish-speaking volunteers, and especially those who can register people to vote who speak Spanish. So that is really important for us because I want to make sure that we're connecting with the community in an authentic way. And so if you live in the Harris County area, or if you have family who live in the area who are Spanish speaking or anything like that, that would be one area that we could really use the help as we are going. Every Saturday, we're having voter registration rallies in different areas of the district that are majority communities of color, Hispanic and African American. So that would be very helpful from that perspective. So, and I just want to say thank you very much. Kristin and I have been in this, and one of my favorite parts of campaigning is seeing all of the first-time candidates who have that spark, who have said, okay, I'm going to trust that I'm supposed to do this. And, Coach Cam and Chuck Cruz and, all kinds of folks throughout the state of Texas. We are a warrior army that's ready to fight and turn Texas blue. So thank you very much. And thank you, Mothers Against Greg Abbott. You are doing phenomenal work, and we appreciate everything you're doing.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you, Kristin, and thank you, Jenny. And thank you, everybody here at Mothers Against Greg Abbott. Thanks so much for joining us today.